It is 1793. The United States is 11 years old. George Washington, first president, general, father of a nation, is in Washington, D.C., laying the cornerstone of the Capitol building. The ceremony is solemn, Masonic ritual, the weight of a new country in every gesture. And then, when it's done, he eats. Not at a formal dinner, not behind closed doors, outside over open flame. Barbecued ox, slow cooked over a pit by the hands of men who were not there as guests. They were there as labor. Enslaved men, doing what enslaved men across the South have been doing for decades, tending the fire, reading the smoke, pulling the meat at exactly the right moment. This was not unusual. At every great American barbecue of the 18th and 19th centuries, the men cooking were almost never the men being celebrated. And yet the food they made, the techniques they perfected, the flavors they built, the grills they used, became something the entire country called its own. And it goes back a lot further than George Washington. I'm Aiden Thomas of Hidden History, and this is the story of how we learned to cook outside. This is the history of the grill. Let's start at the real beginning. Not 1952, not 1793, 2 million years ago. Homo erectus, one of our earliest ancestors, encountered cooked meat for the first time. Not because they'd mastered fire, because nature did it for them. A wildfire, a lava flow, and an animal caught in it. Someone approached the flames, pulled the remains free, and tasted it. And something extraordinary happened. It was better, richer, easier to chew, more energy in every bite. Harvard biological anthropologist Richard Wrangham has spent decades arguing that this moment was the hinge point of human history. You see, cooked food releases more energy than raw food, and that extra energy went somewhere specific, into our brains. Larger brains meant better tools, better language, better communities. Wrangham's conclusion? Cooking made us human, not tools, not language. The fire did it first. By 400,000 years ago, humans were already cooking deliberately, controlling fire, holding meat over flames on primitive spits, suspending food above heat. That's not a convenience, that's evolution happening in real time. But here's the catch. This wasn't just happening in Africa or Europe. Independently on multiple continents, humans were developing the exact same instinct. And in one specific corner of the Caribbean, they were doing it in a way that the entire world would eventually copy, and then claim as its own. The Taino people of the Caribbean and South America had developed something very particular. They didn't just throw meat into flames. They built a raised wooden frame, barbacoa in their language, and placed meat on top of it over a low, indirect, smoldering fire. Low temperature, long time, smoke built into the cooking, not an accident. The result was tender, flavored, preserved. In 1492, Christopher Columbus arrived. By 1526, Spanish explorer Gonzalo Fernandez de Oviedo y Valdez recorded the word barbacoa in print for the first time. In European history documenting exactly this technique, Spanish colonizers were fascinated. They adapted it. They spread it through the Caribbean colonies, then north into the American Southeast. Let that sink in for a second. The word barbecue, which appears on aprons, menus, competition trophies, and lawn chairs across America, is a Taino word, and the Taino people were nearly wiped out by the Spanish within a century of Columbus's arrival. Their language survived in our dictionaries, their credit did not. The Taino weren't the only ones doing this, not even close. Grilling was a global invention, arrived at independently, simultaneously, by people who never knew each other existed. In India, the tandoor, a clay oven sunk into the ground, dates back at least 5,000 years to the Indus Valley civilization. Meat cooked at extreme heat against a clay wall, smoke and spice locked into the crust. That technique traveled westward through Persia, through the Islamic world. In 13th century Baghdad, a cookbook, Kitab al-Tabaka, described grilling methods with spiced meats over open coals in precise detail. Medieval Islamic culinary culture was refining fire cooking, while Europe was still largely boiling everything in pots. In South Africa, the braai, from Afrikaans for roast, is so embedded in culture that September 24th is National Braai Day. In Argentina, the Asado is a ritual that begins 2 hours before the meat goes on. The fire itself is a ceremony. In Korea, Gogi-Gui, grilling directly at the table over live coals, is thousands of years old. Every human culture on every continent invented some version of this. That's not coincidence, that's biology. By the time George Washington barbecued that ox at the Capitol Cornerstone in 1793, American barbecue had already been an institution for decades. And it was an institution built almost entirely by the people who got none of the credit. In the antebellum South, a barbecue was not a backyard event. It was a public festival, a political rally, a community gathering that could draw hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. And in the tradition that had spread north from the Caribbean colonies, the centerpiece was always the same: a pit dug into the earth, a whole animal slow cooked over hardwood coals for 12 hours or more. The men doing that cooking were almost without exception enslaved. They were pit masters before pit masters was even a word. They understood fire in a way that no cookbook could teach: how to read smoke, how to build coals that lasted, how to manage heat with nothing but instinct and experience built over a lifetime. The flavors they created: vinegar-based sauce of the Carolinas, the tomato-rich rubs that spread west into Texas, the whole hog traditions of the Deep South. Those are their innovations. The knowledge traveled from generation to generation. And when freedom finally came, some of those men became the first professional barbecue cooks in America, opening restaurants and roadside stands that fed entire communities. Their names are not on any trophy. Most of them are not in any history book. The 4th of July barbecue became a national ritual. By the 1830s and 40s, political candidates up and down the country were holding them. A candidate who threw a good barbecue could win an election. The grounds of the U.S. Capitol itself had dedicated spaces set aside for political barbecue events. The connection between fire, food, and American democracy was so tight that one 19th century observer wrote that among the amusements of the southern states, the barbecue stood alone as a symbol of national hospitality. However, the very people who built it were being systematically written out of the story. Writers of the era began attributing barbecue's origins to European settlers, to Virginia colonists, and even, absurdly, to a French phrase meaning from head to tail. Anything but the Taino people. Anything but the enslaved cooks. The techniques survived. Credit was laundered. After the Civil War, barbecue moved west, into Texas and Kansas, into the cattle territory, evolving with the cattle trade. By the early 20th century, it had become the defining food of the American summer. Church fundraisers, county fairs, civic celebration. It wasn't something you cooked. It was something that happened. A barbecue was an event, an occasion, a reason to gather. And then, slowly, it shifted from a public ritual into something private, into something you did in your own yard, which meant it needed equipment, which meant someone had to invent it. But here's the thing: before anyone could bring the barbecue into their yard, they needed fuel. And the man who solved that problem built cars for a living. In the early 20th century, Henry Ford had a waste problem. His automobile factories in Detroit were generating enormous quantities of wood scraps, sawdust, offcuts, trim pieces, waste piling up. And Ford, who famously hated inefficiency, wanted it gone. Now, a man named Ellsworth B.A. Zoyer had already patented the charcoal briquette in 1897, a compressed block of charcoal and binder designed to burn more evenly and longer than raw wood. A genuinely clever invention, and it went nowhere. Nobody bought it. Zoyer's name vanished from history. Ford saw the opportunity. He partnered with his relative, a man named Edward Kingsford, to apply Zoyer's concept to his factory waste. Wood scraps, sawdust, compressed into the familiar pillow-shaped briquette. The Ford Charcoal Company launched around 1921, eventually rebranded after Edward's death, the Kingsford Company. Still to this day, the largest charcoal brand in America. Henry Ford, the man who invented the moving assembly line and changed the global economy, also invented the charcoal in your garage. And Ellsworth Zoyer, who actually patented the design that made all of it possible, is remembered by almost nobody. Kingsford gets his name on the bag, Zoyer gets a footnote. But here is where it gets interesting. Even with affordable charcoal, the grills themselves were a disaster. By the late 1940s, post-war America was flooding into the suburbs, the GI Bill, Levittown, backyards, and into those backyards went grills. But the early models were flat, open, brazier-style contraptions. The meat burned on the outside and stayed raw in the middle. Wind blew ash onto your food. Fat dripped down, flared up, charred everything. Backyard cooking was, and I want to be precise here, a genuine disaster. Enter George Stephen Sr. He was a welder at Weber Brothers Metal Works in Chicago, a factory that, among other things, manufactured large round metal buoys for the shipping industry. One day in 1952, Stephen looked at one of those buoys and had a thought. He cut it in half, welded 3 legs onto the bottom half, mounted a cooking grate inside it, and put the top half back on as a lid. That lid changed everything. It trapped heat. It distributed it evenly around the food rather than scorching it from below. Controlled airflow through the top and bottom vents. You could smoke, you could roast, you could actually control a fire. Stephen called it George's Barbecue Kettle, later the Weber Kettle, and he named the company after the factory where he worked. Today, Weber is a publicly traded company worth over $1 billion. But George Stephen Sr., the man who actually solved the problem, is someone most people have never heard of. It's the reason your neighbor's backyard smells extraordinary on a Saturday afternoon, and almost nobody knows his name. By the way, if you've made it this far, you're clearly the kind of person who finds this stuff fascinating. If you have a moment, hit that subscribe button. Now, back to our story. The 1960s brought gas. Natural gas companies, specifically Melton Lancaster and William Wepfer of the Arkansas-Louisiana Gas Company, introduced propane grills as a faster, cleaner alternative to charcoal. The gas versus charcoal debate launched and has not stopped since. And somewhere in the middle of that argument, a completely different approach was quietly arriving from the other side of the world. During and after World War II, American service members stationed in Japan had encountered something they'd never seen before. Not a grill exactly, a thick-walled clay vessel, round and egg-shaped, sealed with a heavy lid. The Japanese called it mushikamado, originally used for steaming rice, later adapted for cooking meat. The clay walls retained heat so efficiently and distributed it so evenly that food cooked inside it tasted fundamentally different, deeper, more tender, more like something cooked over for a long time by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Soldiers brought them home, and for years they were a curiosity, an import item nobody could quite figure out what to do with commercially. Then, in 1974, a man named Ed Fisher opened a small import shop in Atlanta, Georgia, selling Japanese arcade games. And alongside the games, he put one of these clay Kamado cookers on the floor as a display. He had eaten food cooked in one and he couldn't get the flavor out of his head. He thought other people would feel the same way. He was right. Fisher spent the next 2 decades refining the design, swapping clay for aerospace grade cermite, tightening the airflow controls, perfecting the hinges and the seal. He painted it green. He called it the Big Green Egg. And what he created was a grill that could hold a steady 225 degrees for 18 hours without adding fuel, or hit 700 degrees for a sear that would stop your breath. The same cooker, the same coals, controlled entirely by how wide you open the two small vents. Today, the Big Green Egg has a global following so devoted that its annual Egg Fest event draws thousands of people. It has spawned an entire category, Kamado-style grills, that now represent some of the fastest growing premium equipment in the outdoor cooking market. All of it traces back to a clay pot from ancient Japan that American soldiers could not stop thinking about. But here's the truth. Ed Fisher wasn't the only one rethinking what a grill could be. In 1985, in Mount Angel, Oregon, a man named Joe Traeger was having a bad day. He was grilling for his family when his grill caught on fire, ruined the meal, and left him standing in his backyard frustrated. Traeger made his living selling pellet burning stoves for home heating. Stoves that used compressed wood pellets fed by an auger into a firebox, where a fan created a self-sustaining controlled flame. He stood there looking at his ruined dinner and thought, why can't I do that for a grill? So he did. He built a grill with an auger that fed pellets into a fire pot on a cycle, turning on and off automatically to hold a precise temperature, producing smoke from the wood as it burned. Set it to 225, it held 225. Set it to 375, it held 375. No babysitting, no flare-ups, just controlled, precise wood-smoked heat for as long as you needed it. He patented it in 1986. The Traeger pellet grill was born. For nearly 20 years, Traeger held the patent and the market largely to himself. Then the patent expired in 2006, and the industry exploded. Dozens of companies entered: Camp Chef, Pit Boss, Weber, Green Mountain Grills, each pushing the technology further. Wi-Fi connectivity, smartphone apps, digital PID controllers that can hold a temperature, probes that monitor the internal temperature of your meat and automatically adjust the grill before you even know it needs adjusting. Today's high-end pellet grill is less like a grill and more like a precision instrument. You can set it from your phone before you leave work, have it come to temperature as you pull into the driveway, monitor your brisket from the couch, and receive an alert when it's done. The grill, which for 2 million years meant a man, a fire, and whatever was nearby, has become a computer that happens to produce smoke. And yet, on a Saturday afternoon, when the lid comes off and that first wave of hardwood smoke hits you, it doesn't feel like technology. It feels like something old, something human, something that has been happening around fire since before we were who we are. You think of the grill as a Saturday afternoon thing, charcoal smoke and cold drinks and a long weekend. But it's 2 million years old. Every culture on Earth figured it out independently. Taino wooden rack became a word in your dictionary. The enslaved cooks of the American South built a culinary tradition by hand over a fire in the dark. And a country that benefited from their skill spent the next century pretending it invented barbecue itself. A car factory's sawdust became the fuel in your chimney starter. A metal worker's stray thought, staring at a round metal buoy, became the vessel on your patio. A frustrated man in Oregon who just wanted to feed his family without dinner catching fire gave us a machine that cooks with more precision than most professional kitchens. And the word we use for it all? Barbecue. taken directly from a people who were nearly erased from history within a generation of Columbus arriving. It wasn't America that invented the barbecue. It was a wooden rack in the Caribbean 500 years ago, built by the people whose words we took and whose credit we never gave. So this weekend, when you light your grill and you smell that first wood smoke and you smell the meat on your grill, think back to all of the people who made it possible. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Hidden History. If you did, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and comment below on an episode that you want to see next. Next week, we're going back into the classroom with the old staple Ticonderoga number 2. Next week, we're looking at the hidden history of the pencil. Now, take a look around. History is everywhere.